Hi, I'm Chuck Gifford, and I'll be reading you selections from this week's, October the 9th, Inquirer Mirror. Our first story today comes from the top of the front page and is headlined, Child Care Crisis Hits Home by Sarah Roberts, October 9th. On Nantucket, it's a common refrain that if you can secure stable housing, you've got it made. While there is certainly a lot of truth to that, it's not the only hurdle to clear when it comes to building a life on the island. Daycare costs have been climbing across the country for years, and like many other issues, the challenge of finding reliable, affordable childcare is even more profound on Nantucket. Islanders Christy and Ben Ferrantella joined the waiting list for small friends on Nantucket shortly after they were married in 2017. They didn't get a phone call about a spot opening up until after their first child, Anthony, was almost 2 years old. Just married, didn't have any kids, weren't pregnant. We just felt like that we should put our names on the list. Everybody said how difficult it was to find childcare, said Christy, a former select board member and now the town's housing director. Ben is a business banking officer at Nantucket Bank. Being on the list 5 or 6 years is what it takes to get a spot. By the time the call came, Anthony was going to a home daycare. Even stumbling upon that spot was by chance, Ferrantella said. I bumped into her when I was at the hospital after Anthony had just been born. We bumped into each other, and she was like, I was just thinking of you because a spot just opened up, Ferrantella recalled. I think if I hadn't bumped into her, she would have called somebody else on the list. The inaccessibility of daycare is heavily impacting young parents other than the Ferrantellas, especially for children between infancy and 3. This summer, 2 daycares closed their doors, not only leaving less options for parents, but also forcing families that had spots to find alternative childcare. Securing a spot in childcare on Nantucket is only half the battle. The prices have been climbing across the country in recent years, and the numbers are even more stark on the island. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Services, the cost of child care should be 7% of household income to be considered affordable. According to a study by the Economic Policy Institute, infant care for one child is 18.1% of a median family's income in Massachusetts. Across the state, the average cost of child care for an infant is almost $27,000 annually, equivalent to over $2,000 per month. Massachusetts has some of the most expensive child care in the country. It's about 1.5 times that on the island. The Ferrantella's household income would have to be $600,000 per year to meet the federal guidelines for child care, which is $42,000 per year for Anthony and their 9-month-old Frankie, who both now attend the same home child care. Some parents are getting to the point where they're forced to turn to solutions that have unfortunate side effects for their families and for the community as a whole. It's 0 to 3 that's non-existent. And then when you can find it, I've heard people being charged $800 a week per child, and you can't pay that much money and pay rent or your mortgage and food and everything else, Ferrantella said. What it does is it just drives people not to work, and most likely it's the mom. And that's an unfair dynamic. Not only does a parent leaving the workforce lower their household income, it negatively affects their children's development by not exposing them to preschool education. When enough children go into kindergarten with no preschool experience, it can be a disadvantage to the rest of the class when teachers need to spend more time assisting them, many educators say. Another extreme option working parents turn to is moving off island altogether. I heard from a friend this weekend. A friend of hers left because, even though they own their own home on Nantucket, all of the challenges of Nantucket made it that, as a working family, it didn't work out. It was the constraints of childcare and the cost of living here, Ferrantella said. Abby DiMolina, chair of the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission, also knows several families that have moved off island for the same reasons. I definitely don't think it's something that would make people want to work here. It doesn't make it easier, she said. Jason and Courtney Bridges were former longtime islanders. They owned the Handlebar Cafe and Nantucket Bike Tours, while also having full-time jobs in the nonprofit sector on the island. Jason lived here for 24 years and Courtney was here for 15. They both came for temporary jobs but never left. The couple ultimately decided to move off island in the best interest of their growing family, despite having secure and stable child care at Small Friends. It was a combination of things: the cost of groceries, child care, seeing people trying to secure care, especially in the summer as our kids aged out of Small Friends, the lack of nearby extended family support during crunch times, and unpredictable housing, Jason said. Their second daughter needed extra medical care, which required many trips to Boston hospitals that was difficult to do financially while living on island. Access to high-quality medical care was another big factor. We had great care through Nantucket Cottage Hospital and the MGB network, but not knowing if we'd need to be in Boston weekly for the foreseeable future just wasn't affordable. We can now just drive to appointments when needed, Jason said. Our move was bittersweet. We didn't want to leave. It wasn't one issue. It was 7 or 8 factors that added up as we thought about how and where to raise our 2 girls. A part of us will always consider Nantucket our home, he continued. Another gap in child care on island is having nowhere to send your child during the annual town meeting. Parents with young children will often opt out of attending the annual exercise in one-person, one-vote democracy due to a lack of care. A lot of people don't go to town meeting because there's no child care there. Christy and I last year were photographed and we had our babies, DeMolina said. If there was a child care option, I think more families would go to town meeting. Sonny Daly, executive director of the Community Foundation for Nantucket, has also taught birthing classes on the island for over 20 years and sees her clients go through the harsh reality of raising children on Nantucket. I see all these cheery-faced families coming in, and they're so excited, and they can't wait to raise their kids here, and there's this beautiful school. And then I talk to them later, and they're like, well, we had to leave because there's literally no daycare, Daly said. DeMolina had similar struggles to Ferrantella when it came to looking for childcare. As soon as I was pregnant, I had to put my name on a bunch of daycare waiting lists. And when I found a daycare, and then that daycare ended up closing because the person moved off island. So then I had to find another daycare, which I found, and then that daycare closed because their child got sick, she said. What's tough is, like, no matter what, there's nothing affordable anyway. Even affordable programs like Head Start, they don't even exist on Nantucket. So I'm not even talking about affordable options because there are none. Part of it was good that I wasn't working because it's so expensive, said DeMolina, who was laid off from her job after her child was born. Even though DeMolina is still unemployed, it felt important to send her daughter Juliet to daycare for the social aspect. But she only goes part-time. If DeMolina gets a job, she'd have to scramble to find full-time care, she said. Daly said that the Community Foundation would be willing to support a nonprofit daycare center, but it would have to be a rather creative solution in order to comply with its grant requirements. That's not to say it's impossible, but there'd have to be a lot of detail in what that looks like, Daly said. The foundation also stepped in to help families in need when the state paused its Massachusetts Child Care Financial Assistance Voucher Program. When that was frozen, it sort of set off alarm bells across the island because we knew even with that sort of support that a third of the kindergarten class coming in had no prior preschool experience, Daly said. Our board decided that we're going to offset those children who were identified as qualified for a state voucher. We would pay the difference so that they could go to preschool this year. The foundation also partnered with the Boys and Girls Club to open a preschool classroom last year. It paid the tuition of many students to make sure that they had classroom experience. I can say there's a will on island to really figure this out because we know off island there are communities that have that have things like universal pre-K or a Head Start program or supplemental assistance for families. There's sort of a shift in the number of children that are looking for spots, and we know that under 2.9 years old, there's a giant need for care, Daly said. Being aware of the hardships of looking for child care, Ferrantella doubts that she and her husband would be able to afford having a third child. What we're putting toward child care for two is more than our mortgage. The idea of having a third is off the table, she said. Ferrantella also heavily weighted the cost and scenarios of child care before having her daughter Frankie. She told her daycare provider the day she found out she was pregnant with her second child when she would need daycare, and she still had to wait until a spot opened up. Ferrantella's family has lived on Nantucket for generations. She said that she's lucky to have her parents and her sister nearby to help out if she and her husband are scrambling for a babysitter, but the amount of time that they put toward daycare still makes her consider leaving the island. I consider it even with the village. The current situation isn't financially sustainable, Ferrantella said. If two full-time working parents in decent jobs can't make ends meet, what does that mean for everybody else? Still on the front page, our next story is headlined, MCAS Results Still Lagging Behind Pre-Pandemic Numbers by Sarah Roberts. October 9th. MCAS scores for the Nantucket Public Schools are still lagging far behind pre-pandemic levels. But with the statewide standardized test no longer required for graduation, some educators are wondering how much importance should be attached to the results. District-wide, only 28% of students in grades 3 through 8 are meeting or exceeding expectations for the English language arts portion of the test. 25% are meeting or exceeding expectations in math, and 39% of students in grades 5 through 8 are meeting or exceeding expectations for science, technology, and engineering. These numbers lag well behind statewide averages. The pandemic really changed everything, said Paige Martineau, president of the Teachers Union. I know it feels like it was a long time ago, but it wasn't, and I think it's going to be affecting our students, all the way through. Like that whole cohort that was in school from elementary school on will always be affected. Superintendent Beth Hallett pointed out that while the scores lagged below state averages, they improved year over year in all three schools between 2004 and 2025. These gains show that our teachers and students are working hard and making progress. Growth is the foundation for future achievement, and it is encouraging to see positive growth reflected in the data from this past year, she said in a prepared statement Wednesday after declining to answer specific questions about the MCAS scores. We are excited about the gains in student growth across all three schools. This tells us that we're moving in the right direction, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning Amanda Bardsley said in the same release. We're also seeing strong achievement growth at CPS and steady progress in science at NIS. MCAS is only one data point, but it helps us make informed decisions about what our students need next. The school committee is scheduled to address the MCAS results and discuss accountability at its October 22nd workshop. Sophomores took the test without needing it to graduate for the first time since Massachusetts voters struck down the requirement in a ballot question last year. I think if you look at the data from the MCAS, Nantucket Intermediate Schools, grades 3 through 5, is holding pretty steady. CPS, the middle school, saw some amazing growth in a variety of places. NHS is a little bit mixed. I think that our kids really understood this test isn't required anymore. How much we can attribute to where we are as a result of that, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell. MCAS is only one data point, Martineau said. Nantucket High School still produced the best results with 63% of sophomores meeting or exceeding expectations for the English language arts portion. 36% meeting or exceeding expectations for math, and 4% meeting or exceeding expectations for science, technology, and engineering. Because the MCAS is no longer a graduation requirement, we do not skill drill and should not skill drill as much as we may have when it was a graduation requirement, Martineau said. Our focus really is on being able to do some of the things that we had to take out of the curriculum when MCAS became a driving force for our kids. I think that's a wonderful opportunity because we can be more creative. We can do more things that are active. At Cyrus Pierce School, only 35% of students are meeting or exceeding in English language arts, and 27% are meeting or exceeding math expectations. Of grades 5 and 8, 46% of students are meeting or exceeding expectations in science, technology, and engineering. At Nantucket Intermediate School, only 21% of students are meeting or exceeding expectations in English language arts, and only 23% of students are meeting or exceeding expectations in math. In grades 5 and 8, 31% are meeting or exceeding expectations in science, technology, and engineering. Statewide, 42% of students in grades 3 through 8 are meeting or exceeding expectations for English language arts. 41% of students are meeting or exceeding expectations for math, and 42% are meeting or exceeding expectations for science, technology, and engineering. Our next story is headlined, Nantucket Oyster Reef Offers Model for Coastal Resilience Amid Rising Seas by Dean Geddes, October 9th. 4 years after its installation, the Nantucket Conservation Foundation says its experimental oyster reef, built from oyster castles in Pulpus Harbor, is proving its worth. The man-made reef, constructed in 2021 off Medowie Creek, was the first of its kind in the state, designed to protect the nearby salt marsh from sea level rise and coastal erosion. Oyster castles are stackable concrete blocks 12 by 12 by 8 inches that interlock to form a barrier parallel to the shoreline. The reef was seeded with oysters grown by the town of Nantucket Shellfish Hatchery. Volunteers from several island conservation groups helped install the structure in the fall of 2021. Since then, the Foundation's ecology team has monitored the site closely, comparing conditions to nearby reference sites with no reef. Researchers have tracked with everything from oyster growth to water flow, dissolved oxygen, and sediment buildup. 4 years in, the Conservation Foundation says the data shows that the reef is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The structure shows the velocity of water hitting the shoreline softening the impact of waves during storms and reducing erosion. Behind the reef, a sediment is being trapped and building up in elevation, creating room for salt marsh vegetation to expand, which is the key sign of resilience in the face of rising seas. It's really taken on a life of its own, said Danielle Odell, NCF's Director of Research. We haven't had to do any maintenance at all. It's settled in, it's stable, and we're just tracking what's happening, what species are using it, how the oysters are growing and reproducing, what kind of fish we're seeing there. The project was the brainchild of Jen Carberg, the Foundation's former Director of Research, who has since moved off island. The reef's oysters are the same species grown commercially by island shellfish farmers, though the project's purpose is environmental, not agricultural. They're absolutely edible, Odell said with a laugh, but the reef is small. We're not talking about harvestable numbers. The goal here isn't food production, it's water filtration and coastal protection. The project is serving as an important proof of concept for how natural systems can help protect vulnerable coastlines. Encouraged by the results, the Foundation is now partnering with the trustees to explore similar installations at the Haulover Cascada Cotu Refuge Barrier Beach on the north side of the island, where stretches of shoreline have been steadily eroding and overwashing in recent years. The trustees have said that sea level rise has threatened to create a breach along the eastern shore of the refuge, which would create an open water exchange between the ocean and the harbor. Odell said that while no concrete expansion plans have been set, the haulover is high on NCF's priority list for future protection. Anything we can do to build up the haulover is going to be huge, she said, but the conditions there are totally different. Deeper water, faster currents, more wind exposure, so the design might have to change. The Medowee Creek Oyster Reef is an example of how nature-based solutions can support coastal resilience in real measurable ways, said Cormac Collier, president and CEO of the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. As the first project of its kind in Massachusetts, it's encouraging to see it already reducing erosion, supporting marsh growth, and improving water quality. The Foundation's research staff plans to continue long-term monitoring of the Pulpus Harbor Reef as part of a broader effort to study how natural and hybrid coastal infrastructure can help Nantucket adapt to climate change. To help lead the work, the Foundation recently hired coastal wetlands ecologist Emily Junkins, fresh off a postdoctoral research position with the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole. Her research has focused on salt marsh microbial systems and their role in carbon storage and the ecosystem stability. Junkins will oversee ongoing monitoring at the Medowee Creek Reef and other projects focused on salt marsh restoration, sediment dynamics, and coastal resilience. Her work will also be incorporated into plans for the Foundation's future Milestone Center, a new research and laboratory facility expected to break ground in 2026. The Milestone Center is intended to expand island-based scientific capacity for Nantucket's conservation organizations, ecology work, and an emphasis on water quality monitoring, soil nutrient recycling, and carbon sequestration. As sea level rise and stronger storms continue to threaten Nantucket. Finally today we have the District Court report, headlined Busy Jury Week Docket in District Court by Sarah Roberts. October 9th. An island man who grounded his boat on Grape Point over the weekend was arraigned in Nantucket District Court Monday on a charge of operating a boat under the influence of alcohol. A not guilty plea was entered on behalf of Harold Beecham, 56, of 8 Fox Grape Lane, and he was ordered to return to court October 27th for a pretrial hearing. According to the police report, officers received a call at about 8:30 p.m. Saturday that a boat had come ashore with 2 passengers aboard. About an hour later, when police arrived on scene, Beecham admitted to having consumed alcohol and operating the boat. Beecham's account of his alcohol consumption kept changing, from having had 3 beers to sharing a bottle of wine with his wife, the report states. The report states that Beecham beached his boat after getting confused about which direction he was traveling. He also told police he frequently fishes in the area and is familiar with those waters, according to the report. In other district court news from Tuesday's jury session, Christopher Field, 61, of 10 Cedar Circle, pleaded guilty to November 16th charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, second offense, and negligent operation of a motor vehicle. He was sentenced to 3 months in the Barnstable House of Correction and 3 years of probation. Yalbabara Campos, 61, of 13 Surfside Drive, had October 4th charges of strangulation or suffocation and assault and battery dismissed due to lack of prosecution. Dion Bruskowitz, 31, of 4 Blewett Court, was arraigned on September 16th charges of assault and battery on a family or household member, 2 counts of assault with a dangerous weapon, destruction of property more than $1,200 with malicious intent, and 2 counts of resisting arrest. Not guilty pleas were entered on her behalf, and she was ordered to return to court October 20th for a pretrial hearing. Yao Ferreira Soros do Carmo, 35, of Malden, had a June 13th charge of operating a motor vehicle with a suspended license dismissed after paying $200 in court costs. He was found not responsible for a license plate violation and miscellaneous motor vehicle equipment violation. Lisa Graves, 42, of 6 Gold Star Drive, was arraigned on October 2nd, charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, second offense, possession of an open container of alcohol in a motor vehicle, and negligent operation of a motor vehicle. Not guilty pleas were entered on her behalf, and she was ordered to return to court October 27th for a pretrial hearing. Alberto Gregorio, 32, of 62 Arkansas Avenue, was arraigned on a September 29th charge of assault and battery on a family or household member. A not guilty plea was entered on his behalf, and he was ordered to return to court December 22nd for a pretrial hearing. Tyrol Gregory, 38, of 10 East Creek Road, had a July 12th, 2024 charge of operating an uninsured motor vehicle dismissed after paying court costs. Tomas Enterano Tejada, 41, of 26 Honeysuckle Drive, was arraigned on September 29th, charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, possession of a Class B drug, possession of an open container of alcohol in a motor vehicle, negligent operation of a motor vehicle, and a marked lanes violation. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on his behalf, and he was ordered to return to court October 27th for a pretrial hearing. Brando Landaverde Nunez, 27, of 11 Pine Tree Road, was arraigned on September 27th, charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, negligent operation of a motor vehicle, and a motor vehicle lights violation. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on his behalf, and he was ordered to return to court December the 22nd for a pretrial hearing. William Medrano, 32, of 98 Old South Road, was arraigned on September 30th, charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol and negligent operation of a motor vehicle. Not guilty pleas were entered on his behalf, and he was ordered to return to court October 27th for a pretrial hearing. Alvaro Vasquez Felipe, 29, of 28 Pulpus Road, had on October 3rd, 2022, charges of negligent operation of a motor vehicle and leaving the scene of property damage dismissed after completing 1 year of administrative supervision. Atier dos Santos Ferreira, 30, of 3 Celtic Drive, was arraigned on August 17th, charges of unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle and a motor vehicle lights violation. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on his behalf. The charges will be dismissed on the condition that he pays $100 in court costs. Nestor Hernandez Schwara, 34, of 21 Gregland Avenue, was arraigned on January 29th, charges of unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle and operating an unregistered motor vehicle, and an April 4th charge of unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on his behalf. The charges of unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle was dismissed on the condition he pays $100 in court costs. He was found not responsible for having an unregistered vehicle. That's all I have time for. This is your reader, Chuck Gifford, saying goodbye, and thanks for listening.